Silence swallowed the marble foyer as the front door burst open, rain pouring in like a curse that could not be stopped. November wind howled through the entrance of the Romano mansion, carrying with it a woman who looked like she had been dragged through hell itself and left on the other side. Lena Bennett stumbled across the white marble floor, her black and white maid uniform torn at the shoulder, hanging like a flag of surrender. Her left eye was swollen completely shut, purple and grotesque, the kind of purple that told a story of impact and cruelty. Blood ran down her neck from a gash where her head had struck something unforgiving, a wall, a corner, something that did not care about her fragility. Her hair, normally pinned back in the way invisible maids wore theirs, was plastered to her deathly pale face by rain and blood and something that looked like despair given physical form. She tried to catch herself as she fell. Her hand struck the cold marble, leaving red smears that looked like a prayer written in pain. Gasping, ribs screaming with every breath, each one a small war inside her chest. Her body folded like paper, like something that had been crumpled and thrown away. At exactly 11:36 p.m. on this November night, Rafael Romano emerged from his private study. He moved the way powerful men move through their own spaces, unhurried, certain, each step a choice rather than a necessity. Behind him came Rocco and Franco, his lieutenants, men who had followed him through 15 years of empire building and bloodshed. All three wore dark suits that cost more than Lena's annual salary. All three had the kind of presence that made doorways seem smaller. They stopped. The three men went absolutely still. Not the stillness of surprise. The stillness of recognition. The stillness of something shifting beneath the surface of their world. Raphael's eyes dropped to the broken woman on his floor. His jaw hardened. Something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest, the kind of cold that had nothing to do with the November wind. "Who," he said, his voice like ice, like a blade wrapped in darkness, "did this?" Lena tried to speak. Only blood came out. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water, gasping for air that would not come, for words that would not form. Panic lived in her eyes, the good eye, the one that could still see. Then something fell from her pocket. A piece of paper, folded and refolded so many times that the creases looked like scars. It landed on the marble with a whisper. Even from where he stood, Raphael could see the handwriting, frantic, desperate, the handwriting of someone counting down to their own extinction. Rocco moved first. He bent and picked up the list, his jaw tightening as he read. He did not speak. He simply turned the paper so Raphael could see. $47,000. Owed in 12 days. The numbers seemed to hang in the air like a sentence, like a death warrant, like a curse written in ink and desperation. "Rocco," Raphael said, his voice dropping lower, "call the doctor. Now." Then he looked at Franco. "Shut every door in this house. No one speaks about this. No one." He knelt beside Lena without hesitation, the way a general might kneel on a battlefield, and his two men exchanged a look neither had seen on the other's face in 15 years. In 15 years of working for Rafael Romano, they had never seen him touch anyone like this. They had never seen his hand move so carefully, so gently, as if the woman on the marble floor was made of something precious. "Stay with me," he said to Lena, and his voice had changed. It was no longer ice. It was something else entirely. "You are safe now. Whatever this is, whoever did this, they will never do it again. That is a promise." Her eye, the one that could still see, filled with tears that mixed with the blood on her face, creating rivers of salt and copper. She did not know who he was. She had been working in this mansion for 18 months, moving through the halls like a ghost, keeping her head down, her scars hidden beneath long sleeves. She had learned the language of invisibility so well that she had become a master of it. The servants did not speak to her. The guards did not see her. Even the man who stood before her now, she had only glimpsed him a handful of times, always from a distance, always through doorways, always in the way that invisible people see powerful ones. She did not know that the man who had put his fists into her body, who had thrown her against the wall with the kind of rage that came from 8 years of obsession and control, worked for Rafael Romano's enemies. She did not know that Anthony Marchetti had been using her for years, not out of love, but as a key to unlock this mansion, to infiltrate this operation, to plant himself like a cancer inside Rafael's organization. She did not know that every bruise on her body was a map of his desperation, that every drop of her blood was connected to something far larger and far more dangerous than her own survival. But Rafael would soon discover these things. And when he did, something inside him that had been frozen since the day his father was murdered would begin to crack. The sound of an engine broke through the November night. Rocco's phone call had already set machinery in motion. A black SUV pulled up to the front of the mansion, and a man with grey at his temples and a medical bag moved quickly through the open door. He did not ask questions. Rafael Romano did not employ people who asked questions. The doctor knelt beside Lena, his hand swift and professional, checking her pupils, pressing gently against her ribs, murmuring words that were technical and clinical and utterly devoid of comfort. "We need to move her inside," the doctor said. "She may have internal bleeding. The eye needs imaging. That cut on her neck, how long ago?" 20 minutes, Lena whispered, her voice barely audible, like a candle about to be snuffed out by the wind. "Maybe 30. I ran. Through the rain," Rafael said. It was not a question. She nodded, and the movement caused her to wince. Footsteps echoed through the foyer, more men arriving, more machinery being set in motion. Everything in Rafael's world happened like this, with precision, with speed, with the kind of efficiency that came from years of practice. But he remained on one knee beside her, his dark eyes never leaving her broken face. "What is your name?" he asked, though he already knew. Invisible servants still had names. He had simply never cared enough to learn them before. "Lena," she whispered. "Lena Bennett." "Lena," he repeated, and the way he said it, like he was teaching his own mouth how to speak, made her look at him. Made her see him for the first time not as a powerful man in an expensive suit, but as something else. Something that had stopped moving for a moment. Something that had knelt. "My son," she said suddenly, panic rising in her voice like floodwater. "Where is my son?" "Micah is home alone. He is only 5. I need to." "Rocco," Rafael said without turning around. "Find her son. Bring him here. Safely." "It is done," Rocco said, and he was already moving. The machinery of power had shifted direction, all of it pointing now at a woman who had been invisible for 18 months, who had slept in a basement apartment and counted the coins in her pocket each morning, who had worked double shifts and still owed $47,000 to people who did not care if she lived or died. Lena closed her one good eye, and for a moment, in the silence of that marble foyer, only the sound of the November rain continued, drumming against the windows like it was trying to break in. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now, let us go back to the beginning, to 18 months earlier when Lena Bennett first became invisible in this house of marble and violence. 18 months earlier. November rain fell on New Orleans like a curse that would not lift, and Lena Bennett stood in the marble foyer of the Romano mansion at 5 in the morning, her black and white uniform still creased from the package it came in, her hands trembling as she held the mop like it was the only thing keeping her upright. $200. That was everything she had left in the world after paying the last month's rent on the basement apartment where her son Micah slept, unaware that his mother was about to disappear into a house of shadows and violence for 16 hours a day. The mansion rose 3 stories above her, all limestone and dark windows, with security cameras mounted on every corner like the eyes of a watching god. Armed guards stood at the front entrance and the back. Guard dogs paced the perimeter. The driveway could fit 15 black SUVs, and often did. This was not a home. This was a fortress built by a man named Rafael Romano, and Lena Bennett had just been hired as an invisible maid at $8 an hour. Margaret, the head housekeeper, was 62 years old with grey hair pulled so tight it seemed to stretch her face. She walked Lena through the mansion without once looking at her directly. "You clean, you do not speak, you do not see anything that happens in these rooms. You forget faces. You forget conversations. You forget you exist. Margaret pointed to each space as if painting a map of a place Lena would need to disappear into. The kitchen, where 6 cooks prepared meals worth more than her monthly rent. The dining room with its table that seated 20 and its chandelier that dripped crystal like frozen tears. The study where men in Italian suits conducted business that made Margaret lower her voice even though she was telling Lena to never listen. Every floor was marble, polished so completely that Lena could see her own reflection if she looked down. She tried not to look down. Looking down meant seeing herself, and seeing herself meant understanding that she had become the kind of woman who cleaned other people's homes while her child waited for her to return. The other staff moved through the mansion like ghosts passing through walls. The cook did not greet her. The laundry woman did not acknowledge her. There was a hierarchy of invisibility, and Lena had entered at the very bottom. She was new. She was temporary. She was the kind of person who could be replaced by lunchtime if she asked the wrong question or saw the wrong thing. Her first assignment was the 3rd-floor hallway. Dust on the baseboards. Fingerprints on the windows. The November rain drummed against the glass like something trying to break in. Lena worked with her head down, her ears open. She could hear voices from the study below, muffled but urgent. She could hear the sound of a door slamming. The squeal of tires on wet asphalt in the driveway outside. She cleaned, and she listened, and she told herself this was temporary. 3 months of this work and she would have enough to buy winter clothes for Micah. 6 months and she could fix the heating in the apartment. A year and maybe, just maybe, she could stop being afraid. At 8:11 in the evening, after Margaret had checked her work and departed without a word of praise or criticism, Lena was scrubbing the marble floor of the study when she found the blood. It was dark and sticky, half hidden beneath the heavy oak desk, a reminder that what happened in this house was not the kind of thing that left paperwork. She did not pause. She did not ask questions. She simply cleaned, her hands moving mechanically, her mind somewhere else entirely. Somewhere with Micah, who was eating dinner at the neighbor's table. Somewhere warm. 3 months of invisibility passed this way. She cleaned 16 hours a day. She took the bus home at midnight. She paid the neighbor $40 a week to watch Micah after school. She bought 1 new shirt because her old ones were developing holes. She did not speak unless Margaret spoke first, which was never. She did not eat the leftover food in the kitchen, even though her stomach twisted with hunger. She existed in the spaces between moments, a ghost in a house of power. It was on the 104th day that everything shifted. The study was in chaos. A meeting had ended badly. There was broken glass everywhere, and on the floor near the fireplace, Rafael Romano stood with his right hand bleeding, blood dripping onto his white shirt, dripping onto the Persian rug beneath his feet. He was with 4 other men, Rocco, Franco, and 2 men she did not recognize. They were discussing something urgent in low voices. The door was supposed to be locked. Margaret had forgotten to lock it. Lena pushed it open without thinking, pushing her supply cart through, her head down, her eyes on the floor. Hands moved a gun so quickly the sound was like a gasp. Stop. Raphael's voice was like thunder wrapped in smoke. Leave her. Lena froze. Every instinct screamed at her to back out, to apologize, to disappear completely. Instead, something else happened. She saw Raphael's hand. She saw the blood running down his wrist. And something in her chest, some muscle that had atrophied from years of survival, flexed. She set down her cleaning supplies without asking permission. She walked to him without being invited. She pulled out the first aid kit she always carried in her apron pocket, a habit from taking care of Micah, and she took his injured hand in hers as gently as if she were handling glass. "This will sting," she said quietly. Her voice was barely a whisper, like a candle in the wind. She cleaned the wound with hydrogen peroxide. She wrapped his knuckles with gauze. Her hands were steady. Everything about her was steady except for the fact that she could feel his men watching her, could feel their confusion, could feel the weight of the moment pressing down like a physical thing. When she finished, she stepped back and met his eyes for the first time. Rafael Romano was 34 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes like a winter storm. A scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, a permanent reminder of violence he never spoke about. He wore a white silk shirt with blood on the cuff. His suit cost more than everything Lena owned combined. But in that moment, looking at her with an expression she could not read, he seemed almost human. "You are not afraid," he said. It was not a question. "I have seen worse, Mr. Romano," Lena said. The words came out before she could stop them. Honesty wrapped in her wounded past. Rocco inhaled sharply. Franco's hand moved away from his gun. Rafael did not look away. "Your name?" "Lena Bennett." "How long have you worked in this house, Lena Bennett?" 104 days, Mr. Romano." He nodded slowly, and something in his expression changed. "In 104 days, you have been invisible. That ends now. You go nowhere near this study unless I send for you. You speak to no one about what you see here. You understand?" "Yes, Mr. Romano." "And Lena?" He waited until she met his eyes again. "You did not see anything tonight." "I saw nothing, Mr. Romano." She left the study with her supply cart, her hand shaking now, her heart racing like she had just survived something without understanding what. Behind her, she could hear Rocco's voice, low and shocked. "In 15 years, I have never seen him like this." He let her touch him. But 3 blocks away, in a car parked on a street corner where the rain fell in sheets, Anthony Marchetti sat watching the entrance to the Romano mansion through a camera with a telephoto lens. He was 56 years old, with grey at his temples and cruelty in every line of his face. He had been following Lena Bennett for 6 months, waiting for the right moment. And tonight, when he saw a woman in a maid's uniform leave that house, when he recognized her face through the rain-streaked window of the bus that took her toward the poorest neighborhood in New Orleans, he smiled. He smiled because he had finally found his way inside. The apartment was smaller than Rafael's study. 400 square feet of cracked plaster and windows that did not quite close, a radiator that clanked like something dying, and the smell of boiled rice and chicken broth clinging to every surface like a prayer that nobody answered. Lena Bennett stood at the kitchen sink at 6:19 in the evening, her hand submerged in water so hot it turned her skin red, washing dishes from a dinner she had made with groceries that cost $200 and had to stretch across 14 days. 14 days. 196 hours. 11,760 minutes of rationing and measuring and deciding whether her son could have seconds or whether those seconds needed to become tomorrow's lunch. Behind her, in the living room barely large enough to hold a couch and a television from 2009, 5-year-old Micah sat on the floor with a coloring book, his small tongue poking out in concentration as he filled in the lines of a fire truck with a red crayon worn down to half its original size. Every few seconds, he glanced toward the kitchen doorway where his mother had disappeared, checking. Always checking. Children of chaos learn to monitor for exits. Lena could hear the scratch of his crayon, the small sound grounding her in this moment, in this life that was hers. She thought about the day he was born, how the hospital had smelled like antiseptic and fear, how she had been 21 years old and already trapped, already knowing that the man waiting in the hallway outside her room would never let her leave. 8 years ago. She had been counting the days since then. Her fingers moved through the warm water, scrubbing a plate until her nail beds ached. Through the window above the sink, she could see the fire escape of the building across the street, laundry strung between the railings, a neighbor's silhouette moving past a lit window. Thousands of people in this city, and she knew none of them. Invisible among the invisible. The knock came at 7:12 in the evening. 3 hard raps against the apartment door. The sound made Lena's hand still in the dishwater, her entire body going rigid like a wire pulled taut. Micah's crayon stopped moving. In the silence that followed, even the radiator seemed to hold its breath. She dried her hands on a towel already spotted with old stains, her heart moving into a rhythm that did not feel like her own. The second knock came harder. "Mommy." Micah's voice, small and uncertain, carried from the living room. "One moment, baby," she called back, her voice steady in a way her hands were not. She moved to the door, did not open it, pressed her eye to the peephole instead. A man in a grey coat stood in the hallway, early 50s, with the kind of face that had learned cruelty young and worn it comfortably ever since. Anthony Marchetti. Her breath caught like something caught on a blade. She did not open the door. "I know you are home," he called through the wood, his voice liquid and dark like oil. "I saw you come in with the boy. Sweet kid. Goes to Riverside Elementary, does he not? Third grade class, Ms. Chen's room, plays at recess right next to the fence that faces Bourbon Street." The world tilted. Lena's hand dropped from the peephole, and she stood perfectly still, the weight of those words settling on her like a coffin lid being sealed. "Open the door, Lena," Anthony said, almost gentle now, almost kind. "We need to talk about your debt. And we need to talk about what happens if you do not cooperate." She could not move. Could not breathe. Could not do anything but stand there while her son was in the other room, coloring a fire truck with a crayon worn down to nothing, unaware that the walls around him were closing in like a predator's jaws. "I will be back tomorrow," Anthony said. "And the day after that. And every day after that until you remember who you owe and what you promise me. You belong to me, Lena. You always have." His footsteps moved away down the hallway. 3, 4, 5 beats before the stairwell door opened and closed with a metallic click. Lena slid down the door until she was sitting on the floor of the apartment, her back against the wood, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip them between her knees. In the other room, Micah called out again, uncertain, sensing the shift in the air the way small animals sense a coming storm. "Mommy? Are you okay?" She forced herself to her feet, forced her face into the shape of a smile, forced her voice into the melody of normalcy. "I am fine, sweetheart. Just tired. Come finish your colors, and then we will read a story before bed." But before she went to him, she moved to the window and looked down at the street below. A black car sat idling at the corner, exhaust visible in the cold air. As she watched, she saw a man in the driver's seat raise a camera with a telephoto lens and point it upward, toward her apartment window. Toward her. Toward her son. She pulled the curtains closed and locked every lock the apartment had, which was 3, plus a chain, plus a rubber doorstop wedged under the frame. Not enough. Nothing would be enough. That night, she found the note slipped under her apartment door while Micah slept. She discovered it only when she opened the door to check the hallway one final time, a compulsion that had become habit. The paper was white, folded once, her name written on it in handwriting she recognized from 8 years of terror. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. 8 years of interest, the note read. $230,000 with compound rates. 12 days until payment is due in full, or the boy comes with me. I have lawyers. I have documentation. I have photographs. You cannot hide, Lena. You never could. She held the note for exactly 90 seconds before tearing it into pieces small enough to flush down the toilet, watching them swirl away like her life was swirling away, circling a drain she could not escape. The rational part of her mind understood that she had $200 left in her bank account. The rational part understood that she had no recourse, no family to call, no resources to defend herself. The rational part understood that she was, quite literally, trapped. But the mother in her understood something else. The mother in her understood that she had built a life, however small, however fragile, and that someone was trying to burn it down. The mother in her understood that there was one place where she worked that had resources, connections, men who moved through the world with the kind of power that made other men step aside. One place. One man. 3 days later, back at the Romano mansion, Rafael noticed. She moved through the hallways with even less presence than usual, a ghost trying to become less than a ghost. But he noticed the way her hand shook when she poured his coffee that morning, the fresh bruise on her left cheekbone that her hair did not quite conceal, the flinch when Franco raised his voice in the dining room about a shipment delay. He had trained himself not to notice things like this. He had built an empire on the foundation of not noticing suffering, because noticing suffering meant acknowledging that the world was not as orderly as he needed it to be. That evening, he called her into his study. The room was exactly as she remembered it, leather and mahogany and the weight of secrets pressing against the walls like water behind a dam. Rafael sat behind his desk, his white shirt open at the collar, his dark eyes focused on a document in front of him. He did not look up when she entered. "Lena," he said, still reading. "How long have you worked in this house?" 1 year and 2 months, Mr. Romano, she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "And in that time, have you been happy?" The question was so unexpected that she had no answer for it. She opened her mouth and closed it again, like a fish pulled from water. "No," he said, finally looking at her. "You have not been happy. You have been afraid. There is a difference." He set down his pen with deliberate care. "Why?" She should have lied. She should have smiled and deflected and maintained the invisible wall she had constructed between her private devastation and this world of power. But something in his eyes, some ancient recognition of one wound seeing another wound, made her speak the truth. "My ex," she said. "He found me. He knows where I work. He knows where my son goes to school. He is saying I owe him money. A lot of money. And if I do not pay him in 12 days, he will take my son." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a gun that had just been fired. Rafael did not move. His men, standing in the corners of the room like statues in expensive suits, did not move either. The entire study seemed to pause, the way a moment pauses before an earthquake. "His name," Rafael said quietly. "Anthony Marchetti." Every person in that room went absolutely still. Rocco's jaw clenched. Franco's hand moved toward the gun at his hip before stopping. Rafael's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted, like a predator recognizing prey it had been hunting for years. "Tell me everything," he said. And she did. She told him about meeting Anthony at 21, about the isolation, the debt that never diminished no matter how much she paid, the beatings that left marks she had to hide under long sleeves even in summer. She told him about Micah's birth and the terror of having a child she could not protect from the man who owned her. She told him about the escape 8 years ago, the hiding, the constant fear, the debt list that kept growing with interest rates that made no mathematical sense except the sense of cruelty. When she pulled the torn pieces of the note from her pocket, she had taped them back together and hidden them in the hem of her uniform. She could barely hold them steady enough for him to read. $47,000, he said, studying the handwriting. "In 12 days. "That is what he says," Lena whispered. "I have $200 left. There is no way to—" Her voice broke. She pulled her sleeve down over her wrist, trying to hide the bruise Anthony had left when he came to her door, but Rafael had already seen it. "Why did you not tell me?" he asked, and his voice was different now, something sharp and lethal underneath the calm. "Because I am nobody," she said. "I work for you. I stay invisible. That was the arrangement." Rafael stood up slowly. He walked around his desk and stood directly in front of her, and she could see the scar that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, a thin white line that looked like a blade had once tried to divide his face in half. "You are wrong," he said. "You are not nobody. You have survived 8 years of hell and still show up every morning to take care of your son. That is not nobody. That is a person of extraordinary strength." He paused, his dark eye searching hers. "And Anthony Marchetti is going to learn exactly what happens when he threatens someone under my protection. Mr. Romano, I cannot ask you to." "You did not ask," he said. "I am telling you. You and Micah will move into the servants' quarters here. Immediately. You will be under guard. The debt is gone. All of it. I will handle Anthony Marchetti. I will handle the Giordano family. I will handle whatever comes next." "But why would you do this?" she asked, and her voice sounded very small, very young, very much like a child asking a question that had no rational answer. Rafael looked at her for a long moment, and in that moment, he was not a man who had built an empire on violence. He was just a man who had once been 16 years old and had watched his father die because the world had decided he was nobody too. Because, he said quietly, I know what it is like to belong to someone who does not deserve you. 22 blocks away, in a warehouse on the edge of the industrial district, Anthony Marchetti was laughing. He sat across a table from Carlo Giordano, Rafael's oldest and most dangerous enemy, and he was explaining how he had positioned himself inside the Romano operation through Lena, how she was his perfect tool, how she would either cooperate or lose her child, and how that leverage would crack the most impenetrable fortress in New Orleans from the inside. Carlo Giordano listened and smiled the smile of a man who believed victory was already his. They both were very wrong. What neither of them understood was that they had just made something very personal to a man who did not have a personal life anymore. A man whose entire existence was built on vengeance. A man who had waited 16 years for the opportunity to destroy Carlo Giordano completely, and who had just been given the perfect reason. The moment Lena spoke Anthony Marchetti's name, something in the mansion shifted. The machinery of justice, dark and inexorable, began to turn. 3 days later, Anthony Marchetti stood in the marble foyer of the Romano mansion at 2:30 in the afternoon, his face the color of old wine, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white as bone. He had pushed past the guards at the gate like a man who believed the world still operated according to his rules. It did not. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the entrance hall, heavy, angry, the footsteps of a man who had come to reclaim what he believed belonged to him. Rafael emerged from the corridor with Rocco and Franco flanking him like bookends. He wore a charcoal suit, perfectly tailored, his dark hair swept back from his face. His expression was neutral, but his eyes were a shade of grey that had made stronger men than Anthony Marchetti weep. She is mine, Romano, Anthony said, his voice slick with false confidence. You are harboring my property. I have come to collect what is owed to me. Rafael descended the final 3 steps slowly, each footfall deliberate, controlled. She is under my protection now, he said, and his voice was like ice water poured into a glass. Leave. You think you can just take her? Anthony laughed, a sound like broken glass. Carlo Giordano will hear about this. That is his nephew's woman you are hiding. You are playing with fire, and fire burns, my friend. Rafael stepped closer. The space between them collapsed from 10 feet to 5. From 5 to 3. I know exactly who you are, Anthony. I know you have been beating her for 8 years. I know about the money. I know about the threats against her son. Anthony's face flushed crimson. A vein bulged at his temple. She owes me $47,000. Plus interest, which grows every single day. I want my money, or I want my son. Those are your choices, and you have 72 hours to decide which one you are prepared to lose. He reached toward Rafael's chest as if to push past him. It was the last mistake he would ever be free to make. Rocco moved with the speed of something predatory, his large frame crossing the space in less than a second. He slammed Anthony backward against the marble wall with a sound like thunder, the impact so violent it cracked the plaster behind his head. Anthony gasped, the air driven from his lungs, his eyes bulging. Do not touch him, Rocco said quietly, his hand still pressed against Anthony's throat. Do not speak to him. Do not breathe in his direction. Let him go, Rafael said, and Rocco released him immediately, stepping back into formation. Anthony slumped against the wall, gasping, one hand at his neck where red marks were already blooming like flowers. You have made a serious error, Rafael said. You came into my house. You made threats against my family. And you did this knowing exactly who I am and what that decision means. Anthony scrambled toward the door. He did not run with dignity. He ran like a wounded animal, one arm protecting his ribs, his expensive shoes slipping on the marble floor. The guards at the gate did not stop him. They simply watched him go, and in their eyes was the understanding that his time was measured now not in years but in hours. Across the city, in a penthouse on the 34th floor of a building that overlooked the Mississippi River, Cordelia Blackwood was hosting her weekly dinner party. The women surrounding her table represented the old money of New Orleans, the kind of wealth that had been accumulated so long ago no one remembered anymore how it had started. They wore pearls the size of thumbnails and diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. Cordelia was beautiful in the way that certain poisons are beautiful, dangerous, refined, perfect in appearance but lethal in nature. Her blonde hair was pinned in an elaborate arrangement that must have taken 2 hours to construct. Her dress was white silk from Paris, worth more than Lena Bennett's entire apartment. She smiled as she set down her wine glass and leaned forward with the confidence of a woman who had spent her entire life believing her words could reshape reality itself. "That poor girl," Cordelia said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Rafael has no idea who he has brought into his home. I have it on excellent authority that she has been stealing from the household for months. Jewelry, cash, even artwork. The woman is a kleptomaniac." "How dreadful," said Margaret Devereux, whose husband owned 3 banks. "It gets worse," Cordelia continued, and she opened a leather portfolio she had prepared with meticulous care. Inside were photographs, fabricated, doctored, completely false, showing Lena in various states of emotional distress. Cordelia had hired an actress to pose for them. She had hired a photographer to age them digitally, making them look years old. She has been institutionalized twice for severe mental illness. Paranoia, delusions, violent episodes. She had a restraining order against her in Miami for stalking an ex-boyfriend. And the baby, well, there is a genuine question about whether the child is stable either. There have been incidents. The women exchanged glances. In the world of old New Orleans money, a whisper was as deadly as a blade. By the time Cordelia's dinner party ended at 9:30, those whispers had begun to spread through the city like poison in a river system. By midnight, 500 people knew that Lena Bennett was unstable, a thief, a danger to Rafael and to his family. By dawn, 5,000 people believed it. By noon the next day, it was being discussed in salons and country clubs and at the tables of women who had never met Lena Bennett and never would. Meanwhile, Lena stood in the November rain on the mansion's back terrace at 2 o'clock in the morning. Alone. Shaking. The cold had turned her fingers blue. The rain soaked through her thin cardigan, and she did not move to go inside. The weight of 8 years crashed down on her like a wave hitting a shoreline with devastating force. 8 years of being struck. 8 years of running. 8 years of pretending to be smaller, quieter, less real than she actually was. 8 years of believing that safety was something that happened to other people, not to her. She gripped the stone railing, and her knuckles went white. She had $200 to her name. That was all. 200. 47,000 was owed in 72 hours, and the interest was growing, compounding like a cancer that doubled every few days. Cordelia had destroyed what little reputation she had managed to build. Every door in New Orleans that might have led somewhere safe was now closed to her. She was nobody. Less than nobody. She was invisible, and the world had decided that invisible things could be discarded. The rain fell harder. It turned into something closer to sleet. She thought about how easy it would be to simply let go of the railing, to lean forward into the darkness and stop fighting. To stop hurting. To stop existing in this impossible space between safety and obliteration. But then she heard a voice. Not from the darkness around her, but from the mansion behind her. From inside, from the second floor where the bedrooms were. She heard her son's voice from that afternoon when he had been sitting on the edge of his new bed, a real bed, not a mattress on the floor of a studio apartment, but a genuine child's bed with blue sheets and a blanket, and she had asked him how he felt about living here. "Mama, I like it here," Micah had said, his small voice steady with a certainty that only a 5-year-old could possess. "I am not scared anymore." That one small thing. That one tiny declaration. It stopped her at the edge of the abyss. She pulled herself back from the railing. She sank to her knees in the rain, and she began to cry, her whole body shaking, tears mixing with rainwater until she could no longer tell which was which. But these were not tears of surrender. These were tears of a mother who understood, at last, that she was not fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for him. She did not see Rafael watching from the shadows of the corridor inside. She did not see the way his jaw clenched when he witnessed her break. She did not see Rocco step forward as if to go to her, or the way Rafael held up one hand to stop him. He did not move. He simply stood in the darkness and watched the woman he was beginning to love choose, once again, to survive. At 3 o'clock in the morning, 12 men in black tactical gear moved through the streets of New Orleans like ghosts. They traveled in 3 black SUVs, their headlights off, navigating the abandoned roads by memory and purpose. Each man wore a suppressed weapon. Each man knew exactly what was coming. They hit Anthony Marchetti's apartment in the warehouse district at 3:47 in the morning. The tactical team moved with the precision of men who had done this many times before. 2 men breached the door simultaneously, a perfect synchronized strike that took the lock completely off its hinges. The sound of the impact was muffled by the suppressor equipment, nothing more than a dull thud in the silence. Anthony woke to find Rafael Romano standing at the foot of his bed. He was not alone. Rocco and Franco stood in the shadows beside the windows, and behind them were men in tactical gear, their weapons lowered but ready, their night vision goggles reflecting nothing but absolute darkness. "What?" Anthony began, but Rafael did not let him finish. "You put your hands on her," Rafael said quietly, for the last time. Anthony scrambled backward, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender that came far too late for mercy. "I will leave her alone," he gasped, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "I swear, I will disappear completely, I will never contact her again, I will sign away all rights to the child, just please, I am begging you, just let me live." "Death is too quick," Rafael said. "Too easy. Too merciful for a man like you." He turned to Franco and nodded, one single gesture that contained everything. Franco stepped forward and placed a thick manila envelope on the bed beside Anthony. Inside that envelope was documentation of every theft Anthony had committed over the past 7 years. Inside that envelope was proof that he had been stealing from the Giordano family, skimming money, diverting shipments, planning to betray Carlo Giordano and establish his own operation using information he had gathered through his work. Rafael dropped one more piece of paper onto the envelope. It was a photograph of Anthony with Carlo's business ledger, a photograph taken 3 weeks earlier that showed exactly how much he had been stealing. "The Giordano family does not yet know what you have done," Rafael said. "But in approximately 45 minutes, they will. And the man who tells them will be me. What happens after that is no longer my concern." The door to the apartment was still open. The hallway beyond was empty. Rafael walked toward it without looking back. His men followed, their footsteps perfectly synchronized, a sound like a heartbeat in the darkness. Anthony Marchetti did not scream as they left. He did not move. He simply sat on his bed in the darkness and understood, with the clarity of a man facing his own ending, that his life as he had known it was over. He had perhaps an hour before Carlo Giordano's men arrived. Perhaps less. He used the time to pray, though he had never been a religious man. Prayer, he discovered, comes very easily when you understand that you have only minutes left to live. Dawn broke over New Orleans in shades of gray and copper. Federal agents in blue windbreakers moved through Cordelia Blackwood's penthouse like ants, opening drawers, photographing documents, seizing computers and financial records. The evidence that Rafael had provided was irrefutable. Cordelia Blackwood had been embezzling from her own charity foundation for a decade. She had stolen $2.3 million. She had falsified tax documents. She had bribed city officials. She had created a network of fraudulent accounts. Cordelia stood in her living room in her silk nightgown, watching as men in suits dismantled her life, piece by piece. They were removing her jewelry. They were photographing her paintings. They were cataloguing her possessions as if she were already dead. "You have the right to remain silent," the lead agent said, and he read her rights in a voice that carried no judgment, only absolute certainty. She did not struggle as they placed handcuffs on her wrists. She did not resist as they walked her toward the elevator. But she did see, through the open windows of her penthouse, the society women she had poisoned with her lies gathered on the street below, watching her being escorted away. She saw their faces, and in those faces was the understanding that her entire world had collapsed in a single night. Federal prison awaited. 40 years. Her assets would be seized. Her name would be destroyed. Every lie she had told about Lena Bennett would be exposed, catalogued, and entered into the public record for anyone to read. She would spend the next 4 decades knowing that the invisible girl she had tried to erase had, in the end, been the one to erase her. And in a warehouse on the edge of the industrial district, at 4 o'clock in the morning, Carlo Giordano learned the truth about Anthony Marchetti. He learned it from Rafael Romano himself, who presented the evidence with the calm assurance of a man delivering a verdict that had already been rendered by the universe itself. Carlo did not hesitate. He did not negotiate. He simply picked up the telephone and made a single call. Anthony Marchetti was found 3 days later in a building that was scheduled for demolition. He was found by construction workers who would later tell the police that he appeared to have fallen from a great height. The police would close the case within a week. No one mourned him. No one investigated further. Some men simply vanish from the world, and the world moves on without noticing the absence. And Lena Bennett, in her small room in the Romano mansion, finally slept without fear for the first time in 8 years. 1 year later, the November rain fell again on New Orleans, but this time Lena Bennett stood at the edge of her own balcony, 30 floors above the street, and did not flinch at the sound of the water striking the glass. The city lights reflected in wet pavement far below, 1,000 pinpoints of gold and white scattered across the darkness like scattered coins. She wore a charcoal dress that she had chosen herself, fabric soft against her skin, the kind of garment that once would have seemed impossible, unreachable, a thing for other people in other lives. Micah slept in the bedroom down the hall, his breathing steady and deep, finally the sleep of a child who no longer startled awake at every sound. He attended Riverside Academy now, the same private school where the children of New Orleans' oldest families learned to play violin and speak French. His teachers told her he was brilliant, that he read 3 years above his grade level, that his drawings showed an artistic sensibility that could be cultivated into something remarkable. When she picked him up each afternoon, he ran toward her without hesitation, without fear, and that simple motion, his small body moving toward her without terror, still stopped her breath sometimes. College classes consumed her afternoons and evenings. Business management. She sat in lecture halls beside people who had never counted pennies for groceries, who had never chosen between medication and rent, who had never hidden bruises beneath long sleeves. They did not know her story. She was simply another student, taking notes in the margins, raising her hand in discussion, existing in plain sight. The transformation was not magical. It was methodical. It was survival wearing the skin of normalcy. The $47,000 debt had vanished the way everything connected to Anthony Marchetti had vanished. Federal prison had claimed him, yes, his body had been found 3 days after that night, in a building scheduled for demolition, having fallen from a height that made the police detective shake his head at the file. The case closed within a week. Some men simply disappeared from the world. Some debts were erased not by payment but by erasure itself. Cordelia Blackwood remained alive, which was perhaps a crueler fate. Federal prison awaited her as well, 40 years for fraud and conspiracy. Every lie she had whispered through tea gatherings and charity galas had been catalogued and entered into the public record. The society women who had once listened with rapt attention now turned their faces away. Her penthouse had been seized. Her assets liquidated. She existed now only as a cautionary tale, a name spoken in hushed tones, a woman who had destroyed herself by trying to destroy someone invisible. The footsteps came softly across the balcony. Lena had not heard the door open, had not sensed movement in the apartment behind her, but she knew the sound of his footsteps the way she knew the sound of Micah's breathing. Rafael Romano moved through the world like a man who had learned long ago that his presence required no announcement. He stood beside her at the railing, the November wind moving through his dark hair, his coat, cashmere worth more than 3 months of her old salary, moving like water around his shoulders. He did not speak immediately. The rain continued its steady percussion against the glass and stone. "You asked me a year ago," he said finally, his voice deep and solid like an oath spoken in a confessional, "why I would help someone who was nobody." She turned to face him. The city lights caught in his eyes, storm gray and penetrating, and suddenly she could see through them to the 16-year-old boy he had been, hiding in shadows, watching his father murdered, making a vow that had frozen him inside for 20 years. "I remember," she said. Her voice was steady now, no longer trembling like a candle in the wind. "My father died when I was barely old enough to understand death," Rafael continued. The words came slowly, measured, each one a confession. "I built everything after that night on vengeance. 20 years, Lena. 20 years I constructed an empire on the foundation of rage." He turned to look at her directly. "I was frozen. Cold. A machine programmed to destroy." The rain intensified, drumming harder against the balcony railing. "Then you stumbled into my house bleeding and broken," he said. "You could have given up. 8 years of running, of hiding, of being invisible, any reasonable person would have surrendered to that weight. But you did not." He stepped closer, and she saw something in his face that she had never seen before, something rare and devastating because it was rare. "You survived. You kept fighting for your son. You showed up every single day." Her eyes were burning now, tears gathering but not yet falling. "You saved my life," she whispered. "No." His voice was quiet, absolute. "You saved your own life, Lena. I simply made sure you had the chance to do it. I removed the people who would have crushed you. But the strength to rise, that was always yours. The intelligence to build something new, the courage to stand in daylight instead of shadows, the ability to love your son without fear, those things came from inside you." He reached for her hand, and she let him take it, his palm warm against hers, skin that had ordered violence now holding her gently, the way Micah held his drawings when he wanted to show her something precious. "The people who saw you in that mansion as a maid, as invisible, as someone who could be used and broken and discarded, they were wrong," he said. "Everyone was wrong but me. I saw you from the beginning, and it terrified me because you were stronger than anything I had built, stronger than any empire or reputation, stronger than my own frozen heart." The tears fell now, and she did not stop them. "Sometimes the people who seem invisible carry the greatest light," he said, and the words were not performative, not grand, they were simply true, spoken with the certainty of a man who had learned it through months of watching her rebuild herself, one small choice at a time. They stood together on the balcony as the rain fell, two people who had survived hell finding peace in the darkness. Below them, the city continued its rhythms, its millions of lives moving forward, unaware of the transformation that had occurred 30 floors above the street. The wind carried the smell of wet pavement and distant magnolia trees, and for the first time in 8 years, Lena Bennett breathed without counting the seconds until the next crisis arrived. The following spring, she stood in a cap and gown, holding her business degree, and Micah sat in the audience cheering so loudly that people turned to look at him. She had started her own organization by then, the House of Hope, a non-profit dedicated to helping domestic abuse survivors navigate education, employment, and independence. The office occupied a renovated brownstone in the lower garden district, and on the walls hung photographs of women who had passed through its doors and emerged changed, transformed, freed from the weight of invisible chains. Rafael attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony, standing at the back of the room in an expensive suit, unremarkable except for the way his presence seemed to anchor the space. When she introduced him to the volunteers and survivors who had gathered, she simply called him a friend. No one needed to know more than that. No one needed to know about the night he had emerged from his study to find her broken on his marble floor, or the months that followed, or the methodical dismantling of every threat that stood between her and freedom. The news of Anthony Marchetti's death, when it finally broke, was brief and unremarkable. Suspected accident. Possible suicide. No close family to claim the body. The story appeared on page 7 of the Times-Picayune and disappeared within 48 hours. The Giordano family, Carlo Giordano especially, ensured that the investigation never accelerated beyond cursory formality. Some men deserve to vanish from the world, and the world was made better by their absence. Cordelia Blackwood's conviction received significantly more media attention. The trial was public, thorough, impossible to ignore. Every society woman who had listened to her poison found their own names and complicity catalogued in court documents. The collective humiliation was exquisite and complete. She would spend the next 4 decades behind federal prison walls, knowing that the invisible girl she had tried to erase had, in the end, been the one to erase her. And Lena Bennett, who had once hidden bruises beneath long sleeves and counted pennies for groceries and believed herself to be nobody, now walked through the world with her shoulders back and her eyes clear. She wore clothes she had chosen. She spoke her truth without apologizing for taking up space. She loved her son without fear, and he thrived, brilliant and joyful and secure in the knowledge that his mother would always be there when he ran toward her. This story teaches us that invisibility is not permanence. The people who seem powerless, who work in the margins, who carry scars no one else can see, they are not invisible because they are weak. They are invisible because the world refuses to look. But survival, true survival, requires a strength that most people will never be asked to demonstrate. Every day that Lena Bennett woke up and chose to keep fighting, to keep living, to keep hoping despite 8 years of evidence that hope was a luxury she could not afford, that was strength. That was the greatest light. Have you ever felt invisible? What made you realize your own strength? Leave a comment below and tell me your truth. Every single one of your stories matters to me because I read every single comment. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today, someone who feels invisible, someone who has forgotten that their survival is not weakness. Subscribe and turn on notifications because tomorrow we have another story that will change how you see the world. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. We will see you again tomorrow. Goodbye.